Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the 65th anniversary of the Silver Gavel Awards presentation by the American Bar Association. We are delighted to have you here with us tonight. My name is Lisa Bale, and I'm honored to serve as the chair of the ABA Standing Committee on Silver Gavel Awards. The committee is comprised of 18 hard-working ABA members who are accomplished lawyers, professors, journalists, and authors. Their work is aided by over 50 members of our Gavel Awards screening committee, who each year are able to narrow the 150 to 200 entries into a list of finalists. Some of those people are here tonight who have worked very hard on the screening and the selection process, and we thank you for all of your work and careful consideration. The American Bar Association's Silver Gavel Awards recognize just how much the media can do to educate the American public on the workings of the legal and judicial systems. And the Gavel Awards have been going since 1958, 65 years. An informed public is essential to democracy and the rule of law, and the Silver Gavel Awards are the highest honor that we can give for this recognition, and it is fitting that they are presented by the President of the American Bar Association. I am pleased to introduce the President of the American Bar Association, sitting to my right, Deborah Enix-Ross. She is a senior advisor to the International Dispute Resolution Group of Debevoise and Plimpton in New York City. Please welcome President Enix-Ross.
Thank you. I had a little trouble getting up, and that was before I even had a glass of wine. So, it really is an honor to be here. This is, I think, my last official act as ABA president before we go into our annual meeting in Denver. So thank you for the honor of allowing me to make these presentations. The Silver Gavel Awards are one of our association's most important and enduring traditions. And as was said, this year we are marking the 65th anniversary of presenting these prestigious awards. They were first presented in 1958 under the visionary leadership of ABA President Charles Rhine, who also established the National Law Day, which is recognized annually on May 1. The Silver Gavels have such a remarkable history. Because it's 65 years, we wanted to give you a little insight into that history. In their first year, an award went to the classic jury room drama, 12 Angry Men, starring Henry Fonda. That would really be something if Henry Ford was doing it. Henry Fonda as the infamous juror number 8, and I know we all remember that movie. Raymond Burr, who was Mr. Perry Mason, who inspired me to be a lawyer, because I wanted to be like Perry Mason and get everyone to confess on the witness stand and fall apart, which doesn't really happen that much in real life. But Raymond Burr himself accepted a Silver Gavel Award for television in 1960. Other honorees over the years included Edward R. Murrow, Jonathan Parr for A Civil Action, Ken Burns for Central Park 5, Elaine Weiss for her book, The Women's Hour, in time for the 19th Amendment Centennial, and the film Just Mercy, based on Brian Stevenson's memoir. And last year, Anita Hill was honored for her book, Believing. This year, we are awarding 9 Silver Gavels and 5 Honorable Mention Citation Awards. They're being given across 9 categories of media, including books, commentary, documentaries, drama and literature, magazines, multimedia, newspapers, radio, and television. The ABA is pleased to recognize all of tonight's outstanding honorees and their work. And I also want to say thank you to our program sponsors, CBS Evening News, Butler Snow, Steve Wormiel, and Ben Sisman for their contributions to tonight's event. Please note their messages in the program book and on the placard at your tables, and join me for thanking them in the traditional way. The chair of the ABA Standing Committee on Gavels Awards, Lisa Bale, and I will work together introducing each of the award winners this evening. We'll begin with the honorable mentions. One of us will introduce the category and the honoree, and if a representative is here, we'll welcome them to the stage to accept the awards. So let us begin with the honorable mentions.
Thank you. Our first honorable mention awards presentation is for honorable mention documentaries. The 2023 Gavel Award honorable mention for documentaries goes to American Justice on Trial, People vs. Newton by Open Eye Productions, which tells the story of the 1968 murder trial of Black Panther Party co-founder Huey P. Newton. He was accused of killing a white policeman and wounding another after a pre-dawn car stop in Oakland. Newton himself suffered a near-fatal wound during that incident. At his trial, Newton's maverick defense team defended his actions as a response to 400 years of racism, insisting Newton had only acted in self-defense. Newton's defense team redefined a jury of one's peers, and a groundbreaking, diverse jury delivered a shocking verdict that still reverberates today. Accepting the Honorable Mention Award is Abby Ginsburg. Abby, please join us on the stage.
Thank you so much. Pleasure. This is beautiful. Thank you. Thanks.
We're delighted
Thanks
to
to
have
all
you.
of you.
Thank you. We have a second honorable mention for documentaries this evening, going to The Lost Story of Emmett Till, produced by NBC5 Chicago, WMAQ TV, also streaming on Peacock and YouTube. This 3-part docuseries explores the legacy of the brutal 1955 murder of Emmett Till, a Black teen from Chicago, and the acquittal of the 2 white men who killed him. The series features video sourced from NBC Chicago's archives, including interviews with Emmett's mother and people who witnessed the injustice surrounding the case. NBC5 investigates reporter Marion Brooks, complements the archival footage with the context on what the world was like in 1955 and why Emmett Till's story began to disappear from public consciousness, but is still highly relevant today. We do not have anybody appearing this evening to accept this award, but we congratulate them again on their honorable mention.
Thank you, Lisa. I want to pause to note here that President Biden today signed into law the establishment of the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley National Monument, which includes 3 protected sites in Illinois and Mississippi. In March 2022, President Biden signed into law the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, making lynching a federal hate crime for the first time in American history. All of these actions and those honored programs tonight recognize the need to keep the story of Emmett Till in our public consciousness and collective commitment to learning from our nation's history. The third honorable mention is for drama and literature. The 2023 Gavel Award honorable mention for drama and literature goes to Trial in the Delta, The Murder of Emmett Till, an original play from the Collaboration Theater Company in Chicago. The production drew from transcripts to stage a reenactment of the 1955 trial, and it was performed live for several weeks at the DuSable Museum of African American History in Chicago, and was later picked up by NBC5 to be included in the Lost Story of Emmett Till, which we just shared. Accepting the Honorable Mention Award are representatives from Collaboration Theater. And we were reminded that today would have been Emmett Till's 82nd birthday. So we think it's like the spirits and the ancestors are all coming together to honor him. So honorable mention number 4 is the 2023 Gavel Award honorable mention for radio, and that goes to Breakdown, Season 9, The Trump Grand Jury, a podcast series produced by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger was sitting in his kitchen on the afternoon of January 2nd, 2021, when he received a phone call from the White House. President Donald Trump, his chief of staff, and some of his lawyers were on the line. During the conversation, Trump told Raffensperger to find him 11,780 votes to overturn the election results. That was one more than the 11,779 vote margin that gave Georgia's 16 electoral college votes to President Joe Biden and turned Georgia Democratic for the first time since 1992. This podcast series is a deep dive into the hour-long phone call as well as other events in Georgia that happened in the weeks following Election Day and are still affecting our nation. No one is appearing to accept this award, but let's thank them in the usual way.
Thank you. We have our final awards presentation number 5 for our Honorable Mention Television. The 2023 Gavel Award Honorable Mention for Television goes to ABC News for its Spotlight Supreme Court series. Throughout the year, ABC News produced several short programs about upcoming U.S. Supreme Court cases, with an eye toward educating the public about their issues and implications. Correspondent Devin Dwyer, in a very accessible, quick-take style, talked about pork production, affirmative action, voting, and elections, nothing before the court was off limits. The spotlights are still available online as public resources. Accepting the Gavel Honorable Mention Award is Bobby Galen, an associate producer from ABC News. Please join us on stage. Congratulations.
First, let's give another hand to the honorable mention honorees. And now we'll have the presentation of the 2023 Gavel Awards. The order of things changes a bit here. We will introduce the honorees, then a video segment about the winning media will play, and after that, representatives may come forward to accept their awards. So we will begin with the Silver Gavel Award for Books. The 2023 Silver Gavel Award for Books goes to The Other Side of Prospect, a story of violence, injustice, and the American City by Nicholas Dawidoff, published by W.W. Norton.
I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. I lived with a single mom on one floor of a two-family house. For any towny kid who grows up in New Haven, Yale University is kind of a paradise for young people. And the juxtaposition of being so close, that this was so in your face, of people all around me who are living such lives of struggle. Going forward in life, I was very aware that the problems of New Haven are the problems of the country. And I became aware of sort of juxtaposed inequity and some of the consequences. But what I wasn't really aware of is what it felt like and what the intimate day-to-day effects of growing up with such a predicament are like. That's where my book came from. I wanted to know how it felt and what the consequences were of growing up in a community of real struggle when right around the corner is some of the most glorious opportunities that the country has to offer. I was talking with all sorts of people within the criminal justice system in New Haven and in Connecticut. One day I got a call from a lawyer. Ken Rosenthal heard what I was doing, and he had a client who he felt I ought to know about. A boy who at 16 years old had, according to the lawyer, falsely confessed to murdering an elderly man and had gone to prison for 38 years at age 16. He invited me to come and meet this young man whose name was Bobby. And in meeting Bobby, I met someone who was able to express in a very vivid and singular way the experience of childhood, both for himself and for the people he was growing up around. He put me in touch with family members and members of his community, and I began to see how the criminal justice system affected his community and his peers and parents and grandparents and all sorts of people who are growing up in that particular part of New Haven and then extend to neighborhoods beyond. Some of the problems that the book is addressing are very much on people's mind, and they don't feel as though on some level that they are receiving the level of attention that they deserve. It all comes down to poverty. When you're talking about the kinds of crimes that I was writing about, that if you go and look in American prisons, you'll see that American prisons are full of people who are impoverished. Ken Rosenthal's clients know that he's not with them only when he's at his desk. He's with them when he's sleeping. And he lived and slept Bobby's case for all those years. And it was a pretty remarkable thing in my life to get a call from him saying that after 9 years in prison, the state criminal justice apparatus had re-examined the case and had decided that a mistake had been made and Bobby was going to be set free. It's incredibly gratifying because you feel as though that's a lens into people paying attention to the things that I hope they would.
Accepting the Silver Gavel is Nicholas Dawadoff.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, okay.
Wow, it's moving to see that, I'm sorry. Well, I brought along some spontaneous remarks. I'm thrilled that I'm thrilled that the ABA has honored my book and honors the people whose stories it tells. Thank you so much. And well, The Other Side of Prospect took me 8 years of mostly 7-day weeks to write. Long hours of work bring lengthy lists of gratitude. I'm thankful to my hometown of New Haven, Connecticut, which is a vivid, representative American setting in which to think about how the long legacy of economic and social history affects the contemporary United States criminal justice system, how the system functions on an intimate, present street level, how post-industrial poverty, economic inequality, housing segregation, gun violence, policing, prison, and prison reentry influence childhoods, all of this in the context of day-to-day life in an iconic American neighborhood. I'm really appreciative of all the many people who thought and wrote about these subjects long before I did and have since. The New Hallville neighborhood is really my book's main character, and I'm so grateful to it, as I am to the over 500 people who allowed me to interview them. Kids in New Hallville grow up in the shadow of closed factories under such different circumstances from children living steps away in adjacent communities, including their young neighbors who study just up the hill at Yale University. I'm foremost grateful to Bobby Johnson, such a remarkable and remarkably decent person. And I'm grateful to Shay and Kwame and the memory of Major, as well as their families and friends. I likewise remember Pete Fields, who was murdered while visiting his old neighborhood that he loved. And I thank his family, especially Katie Jean Fields, in the memory of Susan Troxler. 3 organizations supported my work with fellowships, including First Look Media, Art for Justice, and the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. Thank you especially to Leanne Alexander, Eric Bates, Agnes Gund, Helena Huang, Sue Simon, and Will Ginsberg. At my publisher, W.W. Norton, my sincere appreciation to Kyle Radler, Hunia Siddiqui, and Matt Weiland. Early on, thanks to Willing Davidson. And if you want the very picture of a wise, responsive, and loyal agent, just look at a photograph of David McCormick. First-rate educators, social and street outreach workers, police and corrections officers all patiently helped me understand their work. Here we are in a room full of lawyers, and the thoughts and actions of some exceptional legal professionals are at the very center of my book. I want to thank the memory of Diane Cookie Poland, the memory of Roland Fasano. I want to thank James Foreman Jr., Emma Freudenberger, Brandon Garrett, Miriam Gohara, Michael Jefferson, Tracy Mears, Susan Sawyer, and especially the dogged, relentless brilliance of attorney Kenneth Rosenthal, who worked alone for years and years to set an innocent young person free. In this moment, I also can't help but thank my immigrant grandmother, Rebecca Davidoff Rowland, an early woman lawyer whose commitment to public interest law led her to offer women and families the vital help so many of you provide to real people in real trouble. Gun violence is a horrifying, unnecessary daily American tragedy that ruins families. Beyond the murder of the dearly beloved and dearly missed Pete Fields, at the center of my book, across the 8 years of writing, I met wonderful people, 3 in particular, who were shot and killed. May Deshaun Myers, Dante Myers, and Kevin Mills rest in peace. During my most challenging times over the 8 years, I was blessed in friends, too many to name here, who had my back and my heart. So I mentioned quickly Ingrid Ellen, John Franzen, Larry Harris, Tom Yelm, Maya Jazanoff, Titus Gaffar, the memory of Ed Corin, Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc, Greg List, Tom Powers, Clifton Watson, Colson Whitehead, Jamie Wright, Kevin Young, and especially Dwayne Betts, by way of thanking you all. I'm so lucky in my adored kids, Ozzy and Bee, and my dear wife, Kari Pitkin. Thank you all.
Our next category is the Silver Gavel Award for Commentary. The 2023 Silver Gavel Award for Commentary goes to Radley Balco, author of The Maddening Irrelevance of Charlie Vaughan's Innocence. It was published both in Balco's newsletter, The Watch, via Subtrack, and in the Arkansas Times. Please join me in watching the video.
I got an email from Tricia Bushnell at the Midwest Innocence Project about Charlie Vaughan's case. She described it as one of the worst cases she's ever seen. The main reason that Charlie Vaughan is still in prison is the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, or AEDPA. And this is a law that was passed in the mid-90s, really in response to the Oklahoma City bombing. And the argument at the time was that, well, you know, the people who did this can't be delaying with these frivolous appeals so that they can, you know, live out the rest of their lives on the taxpayer dime in federal court. And of course, that isn't what happened. Timothy McVeigh was sentenced to death in federal court and executed. This guy is still in prison because he sent this sad sort of handwritten letter in the 1990s protesting his innocence that made him sort of procedurally barred from bringing an innocence claim based on this new evidence in a way that the other two innocent people convicted were not barred. So it's just such a stark illustration of the randomness with which AEDPA filters these cases before the federal courts are ever allowed to consider them on the merits. One of the challenges is that AEDPA is just an enormously complicated law. It's complicated on its face, and it's further complicated by the way the Supreme Court and other federal courts have since interpreted and applied it. The whole point of that was to winnow these cases down so that there were fewer cases where federal courts were reviewing state convictions on their merits. The problem is the filtering process, again, wasn't based on merit, because you can't filter cases based on merit without actually considering the merit. So instead, it's these kind of arbitrary restrictions and deadlines and procedural hurdles that AEDPA puts in front of these people. And so cases get dismissed before courts ever get to even consider new evidence. There's only a small pool of attorneys who really sort of truly understand this law and work on it on a full-time basis. If most attorneys don't understand, you can imagine that most prisoners who are indigent and sitting in a jail cell are going to have an even harder time negotiating these various procedural bars. One of the justifications for it was that we have to reduce the burden on federal courts. We have to stop defendants from filing these frivolous motions that are weighing down the federal courts. It hasn't lightened the caseload. It's just now we're arguing over these frivolous procedural matters instead of the very weighty matters of, was this person wrongly convicted or not?
Accepting the Silver Gavel Award is Radley Balco, independent journalist. Please join us.
Wow, this thing has some heft. Sorry, I have my notes on my phone here. Well, thank you very, very much. Somebody who became an independent journalist in the last year or so, this is definitely an honor. So first I wanted to thank the ABA for honoring somebody who's not affiliated with the publication and who took on a kind of a story of this depth and complication kind of on my own, although not quite on my own. My wife, I also need to thank Liliana Segura, who's a brilliant investigative journalist also, and was my editor on this piece and really helped me kind of navigate the complexities of this law in this particular case and tell this story in a way that hopefully was accessible to a lay audience. I want to thank the ABA for recognizing me and for recognizing me as an independent journalist, but more importantly, I want to thank the ABA for recognizing this story because I hope will bring some attention to this case. As I mentioned in the video, I've written about a lot of wrongful convictions over the years. This one's really the most wrenching and probably most heartbreaking I've ever written about. And the attorneys I talked to, Tricia Bushnell-Arroyo at the Midwest Innocence Project, she's also worked on a lot of wrongful conviction cases, and she said she thinks about Charlie Vaughn every day. This is a guy who is mentally and intellectually disabled, who confessed to a crime after spending more than a year in jail, being pressured to confess, very quickly retracted his confession, and then because of that sad sort of handwritten letter he sent in 1995, when evidence came out basically exonerating 3 of the 4 people who are convicted, 2 of the people have since been exonerated and freed. One sadly has since passed away. But Charlie could not get out because of that letter he wrote and because EDPA puts a limit on what they call successive petitions. And so Charlie had a higher hurdle to clear. He also was given an attorney who admitted to me, to his credit, that he took the case pro bono because he thought Charlie needed representation, but he was not an expert in EDPA, did not work on EDPA full time, and made some mistakes. Again, this law sort of penalizes prisoners for mistakes that their attorneys made. So to this day, Charlie's now going on more than 30 years in prison. The family of the victim wants him released. He has a place to go if he gets released. But unfortunately, Arkansas does not have a way for innocent people to access the court system once they've exhausted their appeals. So he continues to sit and rot in a prison in Arkansas. So, while I personally take a lot of joy and pride in this award, I think most importantly, I'm really happy and would like to show a lot of gratitude to the ABA for casting a spotlight on this case, and hopefully maybe we'll get some more publicity and more people will be drawn to Charlie's cause. So thank you very much.
Next, we will present the Silver Gavel Award for documentaries. The 2023 Silver Gavel Award for documentaries goes to When Claude Got Shot.
Claudia L. Motley. Following an act of violence during law school, Claudia has become a respected advocate for victims' rights in the judicial system in Milwaukee.
By the time I put the car on drive and hit the window twice with the gun, I looked up and I realized I couldn't close my mouth. And I looked down and blood was just gushing out. I couldn't think of where a hospital was. I can't stop the blood. And this is when it hit me. I gotta get home to my kids. I gotta survive.
Motley was shot in the jaw during an attempted carjacking a couple of weeks ago.
Now the teenager accused of pulling the trigger, trying to carjack another person, but she had a gun and shot him in self-defense.
We are told he will likely be paralyzed.
You kind of think of that stereotype. He's a kid from Seagull House. This is not that kid. He's from a 2-parent household, a great school. This was a real choice that this child was making.
Are we trying to do this as a deterrence, or are we trying to get justice?
I wasn't the one that was shot.
The judge is not looking at how things are affecting me. I have to go through all of this stuff just for sitting in my car.
Sentencings are always hard, and I think there will be no winners here.
I don't know what I want from him yet. It's tough.
This really began with a friendship that started years before the precipitating incident of when Claude got shot. Claude and I met each other because our kids attended the same preschool program. When Claude was released from the hospital, he came to our house. Actually, I'm sitting in the very room where Claude recuperated because it was hard to go upstairs.
I was frustrated and I was kind of angry, not just about the shooting, but how frequently it was happening in Milwaukee and how it became such a common instance of something happening that people were very muted to it. So we thought it was a good time to go ahead and start to really getting into the public and trying to say, hey, this is something that needs to change.
After the film was released, we partnered with an organization called The League, and we built a impact campaign with them, which went almost 2 years, where we were able to come up with different methods to get the film out to the world and have the important conversations about gun violence and healing. We really wanted to focus on the intervention and prevention side, but then also the healing after the fact. Some of the things that we're very proud of is a mural that we were able to get done in partnership with an organization here called True School. We also have a bus stop mural about 3 blocks away from where Claude was shot that also has Claude's face on it and his wife Kim and Victoria.
Well, I've really gone into the advocacy of gun violence prevention and also restorative justice practices. I've opened up my own nonprofit to work on that. I'm looking to do some fellowships. I'm just trying to explore this whole side of advocacy. Even if it comes down to lobbying, when it comes down to dealing with bills and things to be passed, to try to, bring light to what we need to do to change, this gun culture in our society.
We thank the producers, but they're not able to be here today. So again, congratulations to When Claude Got Shot.
Our next category is Drama and Literature. The 2023 Silver Gavel Award for Drama and Literature goes to Take My Hand by Dolan Perkins Valdez, published by Berkeley of Penguin Random House.
I got the idea for the book after learning about Minnie Lee and Mary Alice Ralph, 2 sisters who lived in Montgomery, Alabama in the early 1970s. They were just 12 and 14 years old when a federally funded family planning clinic sterilized them permanently. As I started to dig, I was astonished by the number of media reports at the time. They were in the New York Times, they were in the Washington Post, they were in Time Magazine, they were on NBC Nightly News, they were in Ebony, Jet, they were all over the media, and yet I had not learned about them in my history classes. I started having questions about the nurses who worked at the clinic where the sterilization occurred, and I couldn't find any record of them. I couldn't find out who they were. How did you live with yourself after something like this happened? How did you manage to make sense of it happening under your watch? Because I was driven by questions that the archive couldn't answer, that meant that it was a novel. When I reached out to Joe Levin, the lawyer who argued this case, I was struck by his memory. He had a very vivid memory of this case. It was a case that he never forgot. Joe had some huge cases. I mean, he argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, but this was one that stayed with him. This case is still really relevant because this was a groundbreaking case in the area of informed consent. The federal government had produced a set of guidelines that were to be issued to the federal clinics around the U.S., instructing them on how to properly get consent and do these things, and they never sent those pamphlets out to the clinics. So part of this had to do with oversight. And there is now a consent to sterilization form that is still in use after all these years that requires a 30-day waiting period for women who are on public health insurance. And I think there are a lot of doctors who don't know about this case, who don't know about the origins of the consent to sterilize form, why there is what might on the surface appear to be a disparity between people who are on public health and people who are on private health insurance, but which was actually crafted in the aftermath of abuses within the system. We live in a country of inequality, and certain things are going to persist, but if there's anything within your control that you can speak up about and that you can change, we all have a duty to do that. For young people who are thinking about practicing law, there's something that the Southern Poverty Law Center has to teach us about what it means to use our degrees, to use our power to make significant change in society. And that is a legacy that I think Joe Levin and the Southern Poverty Law Center can really be proud of.
And accepting the Silver Gavel Award is author Dolan Perkins Valdez. Please join us.
I don't know about the other honorees, but I forgot that I filmed that, so I was watching it as if for the first time. I didn't even know what I said. It was amazing to see. Thank you so much for this. I have been telling people lately that I feel like this is the most significant honor I've gotten, partially because the legal part of the book was the hardest part. I spent 2 years just trying to figure it out and trying to get it right. And I know I probably didn't get it all right, but I feel, really honored by this. So thank you. As the film said, 50 years ago in 1973, Minnie Lee and Mary Alice Ralph were sterilized by a federally funded family planning clinic. The case representing the Ralph sisters and tens of thousands of women was led and argued right here in Washington, D.C. by Joe Levin, who was only 30 years old at the time. This book was my attempt to bring this history to light. As I mentioned in the film, I was astonished that I had never heard of it. We've all heard about the Tuskegee syphilis study. We've heard about other types of things like Henrietta Lacks now, but I had not heard about this, and I couldn't believe that a book had not been written. By honoring this work, I really feel that you're not only honoring Joe Levin and the decades-long legacy of the Southern Poverty Law Center that he co-founded. I feel that you're also honoring Minnie Lee and Mary Alice Ralph, who are still alive today, still here to tell their story, who still call me and ask me what I'm doing and what I'm cooking for dinner, who live together, who a lot of people think of these stories as tragedy, but what I think about them is they are American heroines. They live to tell the story. They went on with their lives, and they are surrounded by family and by people who love them. You also honor thousands of women, tens of thousands of women who were forcibly sterilized without their consent in this country. You honor storytellers like me who are really trying to bring these stories back to light. I want to thank the Silver Gavel. That's a hard thing to say, Silver Gavel. I've been stumbling on that. I want to thank the Silver Gavel Committee for this honor, which I cherish so much. I want to thank Joe Levin for answering the phone when I called him out of the blue and for bringing the case files out of storage. They had not been out of storage in 45 years when I first called him, and he brought them out of storage and spent so much time with me. I want to thank the social worker, Mrs. Jessie Bly, who was the one who reported the case to Joe Levin. There wouldn't have been a case if she hadn't gone and sat in his office and waited for him all day. I want to thank my editor at Berkeley Books, Amanda Bergeron, who believed in this manuscript. When she first got it, she called me. She wouldn't even let it out of her sight. And the beautiful cover that she chose and that I just loved. I want to thank my husband, David, who is a very, very good lawyer and who gave me the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure but failed to explain it. So I didn't know what I was looking at. And that's why it took 2 years, because he didn't help me. But he gave it to me and it really helped. And it answered 5 million questions about discovery. I want to thank also my beloved readers, folks across this country who have read the book, shared the story, and invited me into their Zoom rooms to talk about these most intimate of subjects, bodily autonomy, which includes not only a woman's right to terminate a pregnancy, but also a right to have a baby if she so chooses. Thank you.
And I will tell you, if it only took you 2 years to understand the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, and you're not a lawyer, that's actually really good. Let's turn to the it is hard to say Silver Gavel Award for magazines. The 2023 Silver Gavel Award for magazines goes to Michael Hall, Texas Monthly, for The Rogue Court That Paved the Way for Roe's Demise.
I've written a lot of stories about the death penalty in Texas. And usually those stories deal with the state courts of Texas. And, but oftentimes you get the Fifth Circuit. I started to hear from some friends of mine who lived in Houston, who worked in the court system, that the new judges who had been appointed by Donald Trump were getting really crosswise with some of the old judges. There was something about the way they wrote their opinions, that they were much more in your face. One of the judges told me, it's just brutal up there. It's like blood sport. Usually at courts, you hear about the congeniality, the collegiality, and the respect, even with people who have different ideological ideas. I talked to a couple of people who said, yeah, it really is different now. These new judges have come in, they write these really long, combative opinions, and it's really trying the patience of the court. There's a real conservative revolution going on in America right now. The Supreme Court is leading it. But the Fifth Circuit is helping fight this battle. Most judges skew to the old school idea that they should be impartial, they should be going down the middle, they should be calling balls and strikes, they should weigh things, and maybe they're going to come up with something that you could call a liberal decision or a conservative decision, but they don't even pretend to do that. They're coming in right now to make the biggest noise, to make the most conservative decisions that come straight out of the trenches of Texas politics. The anti-abortion, the anti-gun regulations, the anti-Obamacare, the anti-EPA regulations. They're not coming in wanting to weigh things like we think that judges generally do. These guys have an agenda already. There are liberals who do this too, but these guys, it's like they're a block, and they were all put in by President Trump, and they are just running with it, and they are having a huge impact on abortion already, but also on the administrative state and on the regulations that we're going to see more and more of these regulations for the EPA, the Clean Water Act, the SEC. You're going to get more and more of those are going to get struck down. They have come in with a political ideology, and they are going to hew to that ideology as long as they can. And that is basically a lifetime appointment.
Accepting the Silver Gavel is Michael Hall.
Thank you so much. This is such a great honor for me to take it on behalf of Texas Monthly. My name's on the story, but there are a lot of people at the magazine who work on stories like this, from my editor on down to the lowly fact checkers. I mean, there are 10 people who work on a story like this, and so we really appreciate it. This is really great. I love the law. I grew up watching 12 Angry Men. It was one of my favorite movies. I didn't love the law enough to not drop out of law school, which I did many years ago. I don't know how you guys do it. I had to find another way of focusing my interest on it, and it was, through telling stories. And for us, it's like telling long-form stories. You got to find some kind of way, some kind of thing to drive a narrative. And this story, how do you tell a story about a court? This court has 26 judges. how do you do that? Well, what was so fascinating to me was they all got their start in Texas politics, you know, and that all of a sudden turned it into a story that had some real weight. And a lot of times at Texas Monthly, we think, well, it's just about barbecue and Willie and stuff like that, just Texas things. But this was a real U.S. story, a real American story. And so thank you guys so much for recognizing it, and we'll keep telling stories like that. I appreciate it.
Our next category is the Silver Gavel Award for Multimedia. The 2023 Silver Gavel Award for Multimedia goes to Eavesdropping in Maine Jails by Samantha Hogan of the Maine Monitor. Please join me in watching the video.
I was at a meeting where a defense lawyer announced that he had been notified by the Attorney General's office that a recording of one of his and his client's phone calls at one of the jails in Maine had been recorded, and that recording had actually been shared with the Attorney General's office. And one of the prosecutors had listened to the recording and recognized his voice. And so the lawyers in the room during that meeting were immediately focused on how could they get this recording deleted? How could they make sure that this didn't happen again? And in my mind, the question really was, well, how many times had defense lawyers been recorded speaking with pretrial defendants in Maine's jails? This turned into me filing over 100 public records requests with 15 county jails here in Maine. Attorney-client phone calls are supposed to be privileged, but what we found is that because either attorney phone numbers weren't registered or some other flaw, around 1,000 phone calls between attorneys and clients had been recorded in the span of a single year. And what was even more distressing for the lawyers and for the people that were being held in Maine County jails was that those recordings were then sometimes being shared with law enforcement or with prosecutors who were listening to the phone calls and then realizing that they weren't supposed to have them. The Attorney General's office and the Maine Prosecutors Association, which includes all of our district attorneys, have said that they don't want the recordings of attorney-client phone calls and that they absolutely would not be using these recordings in cases, but it still put a huge cloud over communication between attorneys and clients in the jails because they felt like they could no longer trust the jail's phone system. What we have seen is a really important response from state lawmakers who convened a study group during 2022 to deeply investigate this. And they found out that there were no consistent processes for attorneys to get their phone numbers exempted from the jail's recording system. They made strong recommendations that a unified process be approved statewide. And I do think that people are finally taking this very seriously on all aspects of our justice system. We have prosecutors deeply involved in this. We have law enforcement, our sheriffs, and defense attorneys all weighing in and making sure that they set up a better system moving forward. We built a database that was searchable by attorney phone number, by name, by jail, so that defendants could look up for themselves if any of their phone calls were recorded, and if they were, how many of them were recorded. It's an honor to be recognized by the American Bar Association with the Silver Gavel Award. This was truly a labor of love that I spent 30 months working on, and it was a slog to just really fight for public records. We were lucky to be supported by local counsel and also the Yale Law School's clinic. We filed a lawsuit in August of 2021. It's about to turn 2 years old, trying to demand that one of the counties who had refused to release records provide records to us. We're still in that fight. We're still trying to demand that the phone logs of defendants are public record, and that if they have recorded attorney-client phone calls, they should at least be able to find out whether that occurred. And so I was very excited to have that be recognized. But I think more than anything, this project has helped draw attention to the constitutional rights of defendants. And it's sparked really important conversations about whether or not we should be recording all of prisoners' phone calls, not just to protect the safety and security of jails, but whether this is really protecting the Sixth Amendment right of defendants to communicate with their lawyers.
No one is appearing tonight to accept this award, but please join me again in congratulating the recipients of the Silver Gavel Award for Multimedia. The next category is the Silver Gavel Award for Newspapers. The 2023 Silver Gavel Award for Newspapers goes to the Post and Courier, Charleston, South Carolina, for Captive No More, One South Carolina Man's Journey to Freedom After Years in Modern Slavery by Jennifer Berry Hawes.
The story got started actually a few years beforehand when Bobby Paul Edwards was arrested for assault and battery against a worker of his. When the last of the charges were disposed of and when a civil case was settled, I approached his civil attorneys to see if they would be interested in helping me with a deeper story that might look at what happened to the man. His name was Christopher Smith, and the evolution of the charges against him and the civil case.
The reporting, although it had been covered extensively, was pretty surface level reporting. And it was this horrific ordeal that went on for multiple years. Jen's just a terrific narrative storyteller. She was fascinated by the case, really pitched it as an idea to do a deep dive into this labor trafficking case. We thought if we can get behind the scenes, that's the way to go.
And really at the core of it was Chris's story. You know, he was a remarkable man. He went through this just unimaginable abuse. How do you become a victim of that kind of situation? It didn't happen overnight. Many members of Chris's family had worked at the restaurant over the years. What kind of grooming went into it, and could that inform the public about what labor trafficking is, what it looks like, what people should keep their eyes open for, and also the importance of reporting. We wanted to get beyond the idea of Chris as a victim, but to see Chris as, you know, a fully formed human being who had hopes and joys and dreams, and that he was this person beyond the crime that had happened. Andy's work really did a great job showing that.
Visually, I wanted to show who Chris was, his personality. He would take the bus and walk to work at the fish market. He brings like a box of donuts for his current coworkers. I really wanted to show who he was, not just at his current job, but with his family, his friends on the bus, and just capture those moments.
The fact that it happened where you can see the county courthouse from the side of the restaurant, and that people from that courthouse came and went every day while this abuse was going on. There were police officers always in the restaurant. Bobby Paul Edwards was related to one of them. His aunt ran the local solicitor's office. The idea that all of these people who could have helped Chris did not, and obviously countless members of the general public came and went from the restaurant, and nobody did anything except for this one woman who was persistent in seeking some intervention for him. That was just mind-boggling.
All these legal and police officials completely missing this for years. Juxtaposed against that is all these people coming together and really rallying around and doing what was right and helping him get back on his feet.
Again, we are sad that the recipients of this award could not join us this evening. Please join me again in congratulating them on this well-deserved award.
We now turn to the Silver Gavel Award for Radio. And the 2023 Silver Gavel Award for Radio goes to Uncommon Law podcast by Bloomberg Industry Group for its Affirmative Action Faces Toughest Test in a Generation series.
The Supreme Court is finally about to hear arguments in the case of Alan Bakke, and everyone is talking about it.
When we got to Washington, we would ride in from the airport in a cab. On the radio, they're debating the Bakke case.
If a medical school reserves a set number of places for minorities, is that reverse discrimination against whites? If so, is it constitutional?
The case of Alan Bakke raises a potential threat to all affirmative action programs because
you had people that felt like if we won, the world would end. There were other people who felt if we lost, the world was going to end.
This was not your ordinary midnight at the Supreme Court. There were people camped out all over the front steps of the court. There were demonstrators marching in the midnight darkness.
When we pull up to the courthouse, the morning of oral argument, there are people out there in sleeping bags. They'd been waiting all night to get in to see it.
By daybreak, there were hundreds of people wanting to hear what may be the most important civil rights case since segregation was outlawed in the 1950s.
It was just a surreal experience for any lawyer, let alone someone as young as I was. And when you walk into a building and they're all waiting for you, and there's that many people interested in it, it's exhilarating, it's scary, it's intimidating, and you just hope you're up to the job.
When we were looking for topics to choose for our next podcast series, affirmative action was something that had been working its way through the courts. We knew it was coming to the Supreme Court. What we try to do with this series is look closely at something and give a deeper look at the legal issues behind it and make it both for our subscribers and for a wider audience. So we had an opportunity to look at affirmative action in a way that maybe people hadn't looked closely at it before and really bring it to life in a way that you hadn't seen or you hadn't heard.
When you look at the cases that the Supreme Court was going to be considering this year, affirmative action has such a major impact on our society, on who gets into college, on what opportunities they have once they're out. And it's an example of the way that the Constitution has a real-world impact on our day-to-day lives. I could think of no case that's more worthy of devoting several months to, several episodes to, and just really trying to understand how we as a society are going to grapple with such an important and controversial issue as the use of race in higher education.
In this podcast, you find out that the diversity and affirmative action being almost synonymous in the law for the last 50 years is something that happened through the courts. I don't think you'd know that if you're just thinking about affirmative action broadly. And I think this podcast really brought it home for people who listened, where they really understand how affirmative action in the law has helped evolve what it is and our understanding in society at large.
People don't know how the law works. When they look at Supreme Court justices, they oftentimes see 9 wizards sitting on their high benches in their black robes. So what I really hope is that people who listen to this season of Uncommon Law will understand how these justices determine these issues. 45 years ago, one justice decided that diversity was really the main rationale that they were going to use to uphold affirmative action, and that gave it the 5-4 majority that was needed. And since that time, diversity has been the main reason, but it didn't have to be the main reason. It's become synonymous with affirmative action, but supporters of affirmative action would say there are so many other reasons why the program is needed, but they're locked in to this argument now because of the decades of precedent. And these are the sorts of nuances in history that you wouldn't know if you didn't do a deep dive into the last 4.5 decades worth of Supreme Court cases about it.
Accepting the Silver Gavel are Uncommon Law host Matthew Schwartz and producer Josh Locke.
Thank you so much for this award. We are truly honored, and I'd be remiss if I didn't, right up front, thank my wife. A year ago, there was a job posting for a senior audio producer at Bloomberg Industry Group, and I thought, am I qualified for this? And she said, you can do it. And so I applied, and we did it. So thank you very much, Miriam. At that job interview, I was staring through a Zoom window at a very intimidating man. Here he is. And he asked me if I could explain my legal journalism philosophy. And I told him, Mr. Block, it's very simple. Before lawyers were lawyers, they were people. And people love a good story. Legal stories are dull sometimes. People think they're boring, and a lot of them are really dry, and they don't have to be, and they shouldn't be. Especially by the time cases get to the Supreme Court, you've got the most passionate people in the country fighting for such important principles, such important questions. I said in the video here that 45 years ago, diversity became the rationale that advocates of affirmative action had to use. But 4 of the 9 justices said that remedying past societal discrimination should have been the rationale. It came down to one person, and this series and series like these show how important voting is, how so much societal change can come down to just the whims of one person. So the key for a good podcast is telling a story that teaches you things, but it doesn't feel like you've just gotten out of a lecture. That can be difficult, and that's where a good editor comes in. And that's where I thank Josh for being a fantastic editor. I would bring him a script, and he would say, this is a good script. Let's figure out how we can make it a great script. I'd also like to thank my family for encouraging me to go to law school so that I could understand these things and convey them to the public. So thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Uncle Stu. I'm very sorry that I'm not a practicing attorney, but I think this is a better fit. And I'm going to let Josh give some more thanks.
Well, I better start by thanking my wife, too, or I'm going to be in big trouble. I want everyone at Bloomberg Industry Group who was involved in this, but a few to point out in particular. Seth Stern really helped us get the first episode right, and it sort of set the tone for the rest. Lisa Helen was instrumental in finding some key sources in this. By the way, we may be the only winner that you all have in your pocket that you could download and listen on the way home, so I would encourage you to do that. Jonathan Hurtarte designed our fantastic cover art, which you saw up there in the presentation. Some of the newsroom leaders who really helped us, Jessica Coombs, Tom Taylor, Paul Albergo. Andrew Satter on our team has been a great sounding board for both of us throughout the process. And really the biggest thank you of all to our editor-in-chief, Cheska Antonelli. 3 years ago, I said we should really be doing long-form audio storytelling, and she said, okay, let's do it. And here we are. Thank you so much. Thank you, Matt. Yeah. Thank you.
Right, so we come to the Silver Gavel Award for television. And the 2023 Silver Gavel Award for television goes to Roe v. Wade from the CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
The real life and political implications of today's ruling cannot be overstated. President Biden called it a sad day for the court and for the country. He promised to keep fighting for reproductive rights, but made it clear it is up to Congress and the voters. CBS's Nancy Cordes joins us now from the White House. And Nancy, interesting to hear from the president, but what's he planning to do?
Well, he's taken a couple of steps already, Nora, and we're told there could be more to come. Here's what he has done already. First, he has directed the Department of Justice to protect women from being punished by their home states if they seek an abortion out of state. Second, he has directed the Department of Health and Human Services to expand access to FDA-approved medications that are used to terminate an early pregnancy. Some states are already trying to ban those pills, and there's sure to be legal fights over that, Nora.
But Nancy, the president seemed to make clear to even to his supporters that he can't do much on this on his own, right?
Exactly. In fact, he argued today that the only way at this point to restore a woman's right to choose is for Congress to pass a federal law codifying that right. And he said they're only going to have the numbers to do that if voters elect more pro-abortion rights candidates this fall, setting up a key election message that we are already hearing, Nora, from Democrats up and down the ballot tonight.
Nancy Cordes, thank you so much. Roe v. Wade is one of the few Supreme Court decisions that most Americans know by name, and it has been the law of the land for almost half a century. So when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, it was a no-brainer for us. We had to go down to the Supreme Court and do our broadcast live that evening. It's rare that we dedicate an entire broadcast to one issue, but this seemed like such an important story, and there was so much reaction from around the country as well. Protests in every major city across the country. So much to digest in terms of what does this decision mean? What does it mean for women? What does it mean for reproductive rights? Certainly with Justice Thomas's dissenting opinion, could this then affect other reproductive rights? Could it affect gay marriage? And so there was so much to talk about. Walter Cronkite made the announcement that the Supreme Court had made Roe v. Wade the law of the land back in 1973. And the values that Walter Cronkite had back then are still some of the same values we adhere to this day. Walter Cronkite said, journalism is what we need to make democracy work. And we believe that firmly today. We need an informed electorate. Voters need a place where they can say, how can I understand this very complex issue? Most Americans have never taken a law class or understand constitutional law. And so they need to be able to come to a place like the CBS Evening News, broadcast journalism that is trusted, that can explain what this decision was about. And that was our aim, certainly on June 24th, 2022, when the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade. How can we take a complex decision and make it digestible, make it understandable to the average American who may not have ever taken a constitutional law class? When this decision came down at 10:15 a.m. on June 24th, the entire CBS News organization scrambled. You know, it usually takes days to set up a remote in front of the Supreme Court, the planning involved. We moved quickly. We had crews and technical people drive down from New York. Our strong team here in Washington also assisting, reporters, producers from all around the country in order to cover and report on the reaction to this momentous decision. So it's fair to say not only did the entire news operation come together to cover this story, we did it in lightning speed. Well, this is an incredible honor to receive the Silver Gavel Award, and I think it's a recognition of the hard work of all the journalists here at CBS News who take our job very, very seriously. And when the American justice system is under attack, we want to be a place where we can calmly and objectively cover the news and give people the very important information that affects their daily lives. And so we are grateful for this recognition.
Now. Accepting the Silver Gavel are CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes and Chief Legal Correspondent Jan Crawford. Come on, Adam.
Come on up. Adam is our executive producer. Yeah, go ahead. All right, I'll keep it short.
First of all, thank you so much to the American Bar Association, President Enix-Ross, and to all of you. I think it was pretty clear after the oral arguments that the Supreme Court was poised to overturn Roe versus Wade, which would mean that it was really going to be the most consequential decision potentially in modern history. And I am, as a Supreme Court reporter, tremendously proud of the effort by CBS News, of course, led by Nora, and our executive producer, Adam Verdugo, and my colleagues, Nancy here, who covers the White House, and many others, to cover it and give it the context, something that would have a tremendous impact on American life. And of course, we're going to be seeing the reverberations for that for a long time to come. As you probably got a sense of from the video, I got to give a shout out to CBS Evening News and a whole bunch of other ways. We are the only broadcast of the big three to actually broadcast from Washington. The other two are up in New York. So ABC still, congratulations ABC too. And we made the decision, our team made the decision that such an historic opinion deserved an historic broadcast. And as Nora said, we anchored that night from the Supreme Court, devoted an entire hour. These were major commitments, not only by the CBS News team, but by our CBS executives to kind of put forth that kind of capital and expense and commitment to telling this story in a way that it really deserved. It was a true team effort, our technical team, getting that broadcast on the air from a remote location, all of our correspondents. Nancy and I, of course, were there, but correspondents from across the country were mobilized for that broadcast. It was truly a proud moment for CBS, and I am incredibly grateful that you have recognized us with this award. I also want to say I'm grateful to the American Bar Association, and that you continue now in 65 years of recognizing outstanding legal journalism. And to the other winners, and Matthew Schwartz, can't really see. I totally agree. I mean, people don't understand the law. They don't know what the Supreme Court does. They don't know what the justice system does. They can't even really name or recognize one or two of the justices. So what you do and the work you do is enormously important to showing the impact of the legal system on everyday American life, and our work and our jobs, our relationships, everything we do. It's tremendously important. I have covered the Supreme Court now. This will be my 30th year. And I believe what we do and the work we do is more important now than ever. And it's a tremendous honor for me to accept this along with my colleague Nancy. So thank you so much.
I too want to say to Matthew that you can actually download the CBS News app as well, and you can watch the CBS Evening News anytime you want, anywhere you want. Just want to make that plug. You didn't get to see enough of it in the video, but Jan Crawford is a master like no one else of speed reading a Supreme Court decision on television in real time, digesting it and explaining to the viewers what we know and what we don't know based on what page she has gotten to so far. So Jan was really a major star that day of our coverage, and I want to give a huge shout out to her, as well as to Adam Verdugo for making the commitment to fill our entire show with coverage, looking at every angle of the Dobbs decision and what it meant, what we thought it could mean, and how Washington and the rest of the country were reacting to it. I want to thank the ABA as well for recognizing this commitment, and it really encourages us to keep going, because if anything, this has become an even bigger story in the 13 months since this ruling was handed down. A bigger legal story, a bigger political story, a bigger women's health story than perhaps we even knew at the time. And so your support really tells us that we are on the right track, because we have not let up since then. And thanks to the commitment of executives like Adam, we have sent correspondents to Texas, to Mississippi, to Kansas, to Ohio, to Pennsylvania, to North Carolina, to South Carolina, to Illinois, to Michigan, and to Wisconsin to take a look at the impact, the fallout, new laws that are being passed in the states, and the impact that it's having on women in all of those states. So this is something that we are going to continue to do. We believe history continues to unfold, and we're going to be there to inform the public every step of the way. The last thing I'd like to say is that it's very hard for TV journalists to work these hours consistently without the support and encouragement of our families. So I'd like to thank the family members who are here to support us tonight, including my son, Noah. Thanks for being here, Noah.
All right, so I also have to give a huge shout out to my mother, who, if we're going to shout out family members, thank you for being here, Mom, and for always supporting me in everything I've done. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Congratulations. Okay, did you take my glasses? Don't do that. Right. Because we'd be here all night if you want me to try and read like that. Well, I think you will all agree that all of these award winners have told compelling stories in ways that will reverberate for years to come. So congratulations once again to all of the award winners and the honorary mentions as well. I'm just going to talk about a couple of things, but don't worry. I know that I'm all that's standing between you and the reception, especially with cupcakes, Noah. Did you know that? They're going to have cupcakes. But I did want to say, first of all, thank you. In order to put this together, you can see the amount of energy and talent and time that it takes. So first, thank you to Lisa Bale for your help in presenting the 2023 Silver Gavel Awards and for your outstanding, and I do mean outstanding, leadership as chair of the ABA Standing Committee on Gavel Awards. I would also like to thank the individual members of the Standing Committee on Gavel Awards and the 50 members of its screening committee for their dedication in judging these entries. Keeping all of this organized on a day-to-day basis is the ABA's Division for Public Education. And I'd like to thank Tiffany Middleton, Tina Pluta, Kyle Harris, Frank Valadez. Thank you all very much. Where are you? I guess they're probably out there making sure all the cupcakes are in place. Stand up, guys. You need to get your recognition. Thank you. As many of you know, this year as ABA president, my focus is on what we call the cornerstones of democracy, the 3 C's: civics, civility, and collaboration. Civics as in civic education, civic engagement, civility, because what the world definitely needs is more people who are able to agree to disagree. But the collaboration for me means that the work of protecting democracy and the rule of law is not just exclusively for lawyers. It is for all of us, whether we are journalists, whether we're business leaders, faith leaders, all of us working together. And tonight, we can see the impact that those in the media have on our society and what collaboration looks like. So thank you once again for all the work that you do and the ways that you work to educate our society and for the partnership that we have with all of you. It's been a tremendous honor to be here to see these honorees and see this great work. And thank you to all of you who are present, both physically and I guess online out there on YouTube or wherever you may be. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.